Royal Guard notices Charlotte shaking at state dinner. What happens next shocks Palace. The streets were lined with well-wishers, some peeking from behind wrought iron gates, others waving small flags in quiet celebration of the royal family. The palace itself stood gleaming under the soft glow of hundreds of lights, every window reflecting the golden brilliance that had been meticulously arranged for the grand state dinner. The event was not just any gathering. It was one of the most important occasions of the season, with foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, and high-ranking officials from across the world in attendance. Inside, the grand hall had been prepared to perfection, every detail carefully planned and executed by the palace staff, who had been working tirelessly for days. Princess Charlotte, usually known for her confident smile and lively curiosity, was seated in a place of honor at the long, polished dining table. The table sparkled with crystal glasses, polished silverware, and delicate china, each piece reflecting the candlelight in tiny, dancing glimmers. Arranged along the center were exquisite floral arrangements, their fragrances subtle but captivating, filling the air with hints of roses, lilies, and soft greenery. Soft music played in the background, the notes of a string quartet floating gracefully across the room, mixing with the quiet murmur of conversations and polite laughter. Guests were dressed in their finest formal attire, the men in sharp suits and the women in gowns that shimmered with understated elegance. From the moment she entered the hall, Charlotte had felt a flutter in her chest. The grandeur of the event was breathtaking, but it also brought with it a certain weight. She had attended several royal events before, yet there was something about this particular dinner that felt different, more formal, more intense. The eyes of the world seemed to linger on every movement, every gesture, and she could not help but notice how polished and composed everyone appeared around her. For a moment, she felt a pang of nervousness. She straightened her posture, brushing an invisible layer of confidence over her shoulders, trying to remind herself that she was not just a guest. She was a member of the royal family, expected to embody grace, charm, and poise. A royal guard stationed near her table watched quietly, his expression calm but attentive. Guards like him were trained to notice the smallest details, from a subtle change in posture to the faintest shift in expression. It was part of their duty, their unwavering vigilance, to ensure the safety and comfort of the royal family, even during seemingly ordinary moments. As Charlotte smiled politely at a visiting ambassador and listened to a soft conversation, the guard's sharp eyes noticed something unusual. Her fingers, usually steady and relaxed, were trembling ever so slightly as they rested on her lap. Her gaze flickered around the room, briefly landing on the glittering chandeliers above, then back to the table, a faint shadow of discomfort passing over her otherwise composed expression. At first, the guard thought it might be a passing moment, perhaps nerves or the excitement of the evening. The palace had hosted countless events, and it was not uncommon for even seasoned members of the family to experience a bit of tension in such formal settings. But as the minutes passed, he noticed the trembling continuing, more pronounced now. Charlotte's shoulders were slightly tense, her movements careful and measured as if she were holding herself in place. Her mother, seated beside her, seemed to notice as well, offering a quick, reassuring smile that was almost invisible to others around them. Yet the guard understood that in moments like these, it was often better to observe quietly rather than intervene too quickly. His role was not just to act but to sense, to be ready without disrupting the flow of the evening. Charlotte took a slow, deliberate breath, hoping it would steady her nerves. She glanced at the polished silver of her cutlery, her reflection shimmering faintly in the shiny surface, reminding her of the countless times she had practiced dining with perfect etiquette. But tonight felt different. The combination of the long day, the high expectations, and the bright attention of distinguished guests seemed to press on her chest. She tried to focus on the conversations around her, nodding politely when spoken to, laughing softly when appropriate, yet inside, a quiet tremor persisted. It was subtle enough that most would not notice, but the guard's trained eyes could see it clearly. Despite the nervousness, Charlotte tried to enjoy the finer details of the evening. She admired the soft golden light that played across the crystal glasses, the way the tablecloths were perfectly arranged, and the meticulous care with which each course would be served. The palace staff moved almost silently around the hall, anticipating every need, adjusting the placement of glasses, ensuring every chair was perfectly aligned, every napkin folded precisely. It was a dance of invisible precision, designed to create an environment where elegance and order prevailed. Yet even amid this careful orchestration, Charlotte's anxiety subtly persisted, a reminder that even the most prepared individuals could feel human vulnerability. As the first course was served, Charlotte took small bites, trying to focus on the flavors. She noticed the soft texture of the food, the delicate seasoning, and the care with which each dish had been prepared. Around her, dignitaries exchanged polite compliments and engaged in quiet, sophisticated conversation. But despite the formality, Charlotte could not entirely shake the sensation of unease. Her hands continued to tremble slightly, and she adjusted her posture again, gripping the edge of her chair as if it could anchor her confidence. The guard, who had been observing from a distance, quietly noted her actions, ready to step in if necessary, but maintaining a respectful distance for the sake of discretion. The conversations around her flowed smoothly, diplomatic and courteous, yet Charlotte sometimes struggled to fully participate. She smiled at the appropriate moments, responded to questions with brief but polite answers, and nodded when required, but her mind occasionally drifted to the sensation in her body, the nervous shaking she could not entirely control. Her mother, ever attentive, leaned slightly closer at intervals, offering whispered words of encouragement, gentle enough that no one else could hear, small gestures meant to provide comfort in a moment of subtle distress. The guard, noticing these exchanges, understood that this was a delicate situation requiring both vigilance and tact. Even as the dinner continued, Charlotte found herself captivated by small, ordinary details that reminded her of normal life beyond the palace walls. She admired the gentle flicker of candlelight on the silverware, the quiet hum of conversation, and the subtle scent of flowers that filled the hall. These tiny elements, seemingly insignificant to others, offered her small moments of calm amid the tension. Yet the trembling persisted, a quiet reminder that the pressures of royalty could manifest in ways even the most composed could not anticipate. By the time the main course was served, Charlotte's hand tremors were just noticeable enough to catch the guard's trained eye once more. He exchanged a brief, silent glance with another aide nearby, a gesture almost imperceptible, signaling that he was aware of the situation but maintaining discretion. It was a delicate balance. He could not cause a scene, nor could he ignore the signs entirely. The palace had trained for emergencies, but sometimes the most important skill was subtle observation, understanding human behavior and anticipating needs before they became crises. Throughout the evening, Charlotte continued to smile, laugh softly when appropriate, and respond to guests with the grace expected of her. Yet inside, she quietly struggled, wishing she could find a moment of solitude to calm herself. The guard, steadfast and vigilant, continued to watch, aware that small gestures of support or discreet intervention might be necessary, but only at the right time. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and the quiet courage required of those who protected and served the royal family. By the time dessert was announced, the first whispers of concern had begun to form in the background. Charlotte's mother subtly inquired if she was feeling well, offering another quiet word of reassurance. Charlotte nodded, attempting to steady her hands and regain composure. The guard, ever attentive, remained close enough to act if needed, but distant enough to maintain the dignity and decorum of the grand state dinner. The tension in the air was almost imperceptible to others, but for those trained to observe and protect, every tremor, every shift in posture told a story of a young princess balancing the weight of her responsibilities with the very real humanity that made her relatable. And human. The night continued, a delicate dance of elegance, vigilance, and quiet care. Charlotte's trembling, though subtle, had not gone unnoticed, and the presence of attentive eyes ensured that she would be safe and supported. The palace, with all its grandeur, also revealed its human side in these moments. The invisible network of care, concern, and attentiveness that allowed the royal family to navigate the pressures of their public roles while remaining grounded in reality. Even as the candles flickered and the string quartet played softly in the background, Charlotte could feel a small sense of relief, knowing that she was not alone. The guard's silent observation, her mother's gentle support, and the quiet professionalism of the palace staff created an invisible shield, allowing her to maintain composure in public while also acknowledging her own vulnerability. In this way, the evening, though daunting, became not just a display of royal elegance, but also a testament to the quiet humanity that existed behind the polished surface of tradition and protocol. As the dinner progressed, the atmosphere in the grand hall remained elegant and refined, yet for Princess Charlotte, the evening had begun to feel heavier. The soft hum of polite conversation and the gentle music from the string quartet continued around her, but inside, she felt a quiet storm of nerves and unease. Her hands, which had been slightly trembling when she first took her seat, now shook a little more noticeably. At first, she tried to ignore it, pressing her palms lightly against her lap and taking slow, steady breaths. She reminded herself of all the training and guidance she had received for such occasions: how to sit properly, how to respond with grace, and how to maintain composure even when feeling nervous. Despite her efforts, Charlotte could not completely silence the wave of tension rising within her. She felt a rush of warmth in her chest, her heartbeat quickening slightly, and a sensation of pressure in her stomach. She tried to focus on the small, comforting details of the evening: the gentle glow of candles reflecting on polished silverware, the soft fragrance of the flowers on the table, and the subtle elegance of her surroundings. Yet even these small comforts seemed to highlight the difference between the calm and control she wished to feel and the nervousness she could not entirely hide. The royal guard, who had been observing Charlotte from a distance, remained quietly attentive. His eyes were trained to notice even the smallest signs of distress, and now, as he saw her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth and her gaze flicking nervously around the room, he realized that this was more than a passing moment of discomfort. He remained calm, his body relaxed but alert, understanding that intervention at the wrong moment could draw attention, but ignoring the signs could risk Charlotte's well-being. His mind ran through the possibilities. She might be overwhelmed by the grandeur of the event, nervous about the dignitaries nearby, or simply exhausted from the day's activities. Charlotte's mother, seated beside her, had begun to notice the changes as well. She leaned slightly toward her daughter at intervals, offering soft, reassuring whispers that no one else could hear. The gestures were subtle: a gentle touch on the hand, a quick smile, a whispered word of encouragement, but they were enough to let Charlotte know that she was not alone. These small acts of support helped anchor her, reminding her that even in moments of public pressure, there were people who cared deeply for her comfort and safety. At the same time, Charlotte could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Every guest seemed perfectly composed, their laughter polite and their movements precise. She noticed the eyes of some dignitaries briefly glancing in her direction, and she felt a small, quiet tension build as she reminded herself that she was expected to maintain the same level of poise. The pressure was not harsh or critical, but it was a gentle, persistent reminder of her responsibilities as a member of the royal family. She straightened her back, tried to lift her chin, and took another careful sip of water, hoping it would steady her. The food, beautifully presented, was slowly served in courses. Charlotte attempted to focus on the flavors, appreciating the delicate seasoning and the texture of each dish. Yet, despite her best efforts, her hands continued to tremble. When she reached for her fork, it shook slightly, prompting her to pause and steady it against the edge of the plate. She felt her face warm with embarrassment, even though no one around her had likely noticed. In the grand hall, where every movement was observed and every gesture seemed significant, even the smallest sign of nervousness felt magnified in her mind. Nearby, the guard remained vigilant. He noticed the way Charlotte shifted in her seat, how she occasionally pressed her fingertips against the table for support, and the brief moment when her gaze faltered as if she were searching for a familiar or comforting sight. The guard understood that subtle signals like these could indicate discomfort, anxiety, or even the onset of faintness. He exchanged a quiet, almost imperceptible glance with another aide, silently conveying that he was monitoring the situation carefully. Their training emphasized patience and subtlety. Sometimes the best intervention was not immediate action but thoughtful observation, ready to respond if the situation escalated. Charlotte, meanwhile, attempted to focus on the conversations happening around her. Guests were exchanging polite remarks, discussing matters of diplomacy, trade, and culture, and each conversation carried a tone of respect and professionalism. She smiled politely, nodded at appropriate moments, and gave brief but courteous responses. Yet in between these moments, her mind kept returning to the tremor in her hands and the fluttering in her chest. She pressed her fingertips lightly against her knees, attempting to calm herself with small, quiet movements. Her mother noticed the tension in Charlotte's posture and offered another gentle word of encouragement. "You're doing wonderfully," she whispered, her voice soft and comforting. Charlotte gave a small nod, grateful for the reassurance, though she still felt a quiet anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. She reminded herself that it was natural to feel nervous in such formal and high-pressure settings, and she tried to draw on the techniques she had learned over the years for remaining composed. Breathing slowly and steadily, she focused on the music, letting the soft notes of the string quartet fill her ears and momentarily push away the nervousness. Despite these efforts, Charlotte's tremors persisted. The royal guard continued to watch closely, aware that each passing minute was important. If Charlotte's condition worsened, quick but discreet action would be necessary to ensure her safety while maintaining the decorum of the event. The guard observed her posture, noting the tension in her shoulders and the occasional shift in her weight, which indicated she was trying to find comfort. He also watched her interactions with nearby guests, ensuring that any assistance could be provided subtly without drawing unwanted attention. The rest of the royal family remained attentive as well. Charlotte's father offered a reassuring glance from across the table, his presence alone a quiet support. Her mother, continuing to monitor her closely, leaned slightly closer, ready to assist if Charlotte showed further signs of distress. The combined vigilance of the family and the palace staff created an invisible safety net, ensuring that even a private moment of vulnerability would not go unnoticed or unattended. As dessert was served, Charlotte tried to focus on the delicate flavors and the artistry of the presentation, but the tremors in her hands made it difficult to fully enjoy the moment. She carefully placed her spoon on the plate, attempting to steady her grip, and took a few deep breaths to calm herself. The guard, aware of these subtle signs, adjusted his stance slightly, remaining alert yet unobtrusive. He had learned through years of training that sometimes the smallest gestures, such as positioning oneself nearby or maintaining a quiet presence, could provide reassurance and safety without interrupting the formal proceedings. Charlotte's mind wandered briefly to the day that had led to this evening. The morning had been filled with engagements and meetings, each demanding her attention and focus. By the afternoon, she had attended a series of briefings and preparations for the state dinner, which had left her feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Now, in the grandeur of the palace dining hall, she felt the combined weight of responsibility, expectation, and excitement pressing gently on her shoulders. The trembling in her hands was a natural response to this mix of emotions, a reminder that even in moments of refinement and elegance, the human body reacts to stress in subtle ways. Around her, the guests continued their conversations, unaware of the quiet struggle unfolding nearby. Charlotte's polite smiles and courteous responses masked the internal tension she felt. Her mother continued to offer discreet reassurance, and the guard maintained his watchful presence, ready to act if necessary. The interplay of careful observation, subtle intervention, and quiet support created a delicate balance that allowed Charlotte to continue participating in the evening, while also acknowledging her own human vulnerability. By the time the final course was nearing completion, Charlotte had begun to regain a small measure of composure. The careful support of those around her, the gentle guidance of her mother, the silent vigilance of the guard, and the steady presence of her father helped her feel more secure. While the trembling had not disappeared entirely, it had lessened enough that she could focus more fully on the surroundings, the conversations, and the subtle beauty of the palace itself. The grand hall, with its glowing chandeliers, polished silver, and refined atmosphere, no longer felt overwhelming, and Charlotte began to take quiet pride in her ability to navigate the evening despite the challenges she had faced. Even as the dinner drew to a close, the sense of care and attentiveness remained palpable. The royal guard, still positioned nearby, ensured that Charlotte could leave the table with dignity and support if necessary. Her mother's quiet presence continued to offer reassurance, and the careful orchestration of the palace staff ensured that the event maintained its elegance while also providing a safe environment for all members of the royal family. In these moments, Charlotte realized the importance of the invisible network of care that surrounded her. While the evening had been filled with high expectations and formalities, it had also highlighted the humanity that underlies even the most polished and refined appearances. The trembling in her hands was a reminder that strength and vulnerability can coexist, and that support, attentiveness, and empathy can transform moments of discomfort into opportunities for understanding and growth. As the evening progressed, the grand state dinner maintained its rhythm of elegance and diplomacy, but Princess Charlotte's unease had grown more noticeable. She had managed to hold herself together for most of the meal, smiling politely and responding appropriately to the gentle chatter around her. Yet her trembling hands and occasional shivers suggested that her body was struggling to keep pace with the demands of the evening. The royal guard, who had been observing her since the beginning of the dinner, continued his quiet vigil, his eyes flicking subtly between Charlotte and the movements of the staff and guests around her. He knew that the subtle signs of distress she displayed were important. In situations like this, he understood that even a small lapse in composure could lead to discomfort, embarrassment, or worse if left unattended. Charlotte, trying to remain composed, leaned slightly forward to engage in a polite conversation with a visiting dignitary. The words came easily enough, but her mind was distracted by the persistent tremor in her fingers and the tightness she felt in her chest. She pressed her palms gently against the tablecloth, hoping to stabilize her shaking hands, but the movement only brought a brief warmth to her cheeks as she realized the tremors were still noticeable. Her mother, ever observant, leaned in just enough to offer a reassuring whisper. Charlotte managed a faint nod, appreciating the quiet support, but inside, a wave of anxiety continued to ripple through her. The guard, noticing the increase in her tremors, moved just slightly closer, careful to maintain distance so as not to draw attention. His posture remained formal, yet his mind raced through protocols and contingency plans. He considered what might happen if Charlotte's condition worsened, if she fainted, became dizzy, or was overwhelmed by anxiety. In his line of duty, anticipating potential situations before they arose was crucial. Acting too soon could disrupt the dinner and create unnecessary attention, but acting too late could be dangerous. It was a delicate balance, and the guard knew that the next few minutes would require both vigilance and patience. Charlotte's father, seated across the table, noticed the subtle tension in his daughter's posture. He had been observing discreetly, careful not to alarm others or draw attention to the fact that Charlotte might be struggling. He recognized the signs from previous occasions, the slight shaking of hands, the small shifts in weight, the tightening of shoulders. Each of these small details told a story, and together they painted a picture of a young princess under pressure. He exchanged a brief glance with Charlotte's mother, silently communicating concern and the need for careful attention without interrupting the flow of the dinner. Meanwhile, Charlotte tried to focus on the conversation happening directly in front of her. A dignitary from a neighboring country was sharing a story of a recent cultural festival, speaking with a mixture of humor and enthusiasm. Charlotte smiled politely, nodded at the appropriate moments, and gave short, courteous responses. Yet her mind could not fully engage. The tremors in her hands continued, subtle but persistent, and she felt a slight queasiness that made her swallow carefully before speaking. She wished she could excuse herself, but she knew that leaving the table abruptly would draw attention and potentially alarm the guests. She was caught between the desire to find a private moment of calm and the expectation to remain composed in public. The royal guard, still stationed nearby, observed the interaction with careful attention. He noted the way Charlotte's fingers tapped lightly against the edge of her plate, the brief downward glance she gave when trying to steady herself, and the tiny shake of her hand as she lifted her glass to sip water. He understood the subtle language of body signals and knew that Charlotte needed support, but that support had to be provided carefully without creating a scene. The balance between discretion and intervention was delicate, requiring both patience and readiness to act. Charlotte's mother, noticing that her daughter's discomfort was increasing, placed her hand gently on Charlotte's arm, offering a brief touch of reassurance. It was a gesture meant to convey calm and stability, a reminder that she was not alone. Charlotte responded with a small squeeze of her mother's hand, grateful for the silent support, yet the tremor persisted. She drew in a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her chest still felt tight, and her heartbeat seemed louder than the gentle music filling the hall. She realized she could no longer ignore the signals her body was sending. This was not just a fleeting moment of nerves. It was a genuine need for calm and care. At that moment, the guard made a quiet decision. He had been watching closely, evaluating each subtle movement, and now it was clear that Charlotte required discreet intervention. Without making any abrupt movements or drawing attention, he signaled subtly to a nearby aide. The aide understood immediately, moving in sync with the guard's silent instructions. They had been trained for countless scenarios, and the coordination between them was seamless, almost invisible to the guests around the table. The goal was simple: ensure Charlotte's comfort and safety without disrupting the elegance of the evening. Charlotte's mother, sensing the silent plan, nodded ever so slightly, conveying her trust in the staff's judgment. She leaned close, whispering softly to her daughter, "It's okay, love, you're safe. Just follow my lead for a moment." Charlotte nodded again, feeling a small wave of relief. The reassurance, combined with the quiet coordination of the guard and staff, created a sense of calm she had not felt for the entire evening. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge that it was okay to receive help. The aide approached with a glass of water and a small handkerchief, offering them with careful discretion. Charlotte took a sip, the cool liquid providing a small comfort, while the guard remained vigilant nearby, ready to act if necessary. The moment was brief but significant, a demonstration of professionalism, empathy, and the invisible network of care surrounding the royal family. Charlotte felt the tension in her body ease slightly, though she still remained aware of the need to stay composed in the presence of dignitaries. As the meal continued, the guard's attention never wavered. He noted how Charlotte shifted in her seat, subtly leaning toward her mother for support, and how she occasionally pressed her fingertips against the table to steady herself. Each movement, each tremor, was a signal that guided his actions and ensured that he remained prepared for any escalation. In the background, the orchestra continued to play softly, the gentle notes providing a calming rhythm that helped mask the subtle tension at the table. Charlotte's father, seeing that the situation was under control but still delicate, remained nearby, maintaining a calm presence that allowed his daughter to feel secure. The combination of family support, trained staff, and the attentive guard created an environment where Charlotte could begin to regain control of her body and mind, even in the midst of a formal and high-pressure event. Despite the careful attention, Charlotte could not entirely ignore the physical sensations of anxiety. Her hands continued to shake intermittently, and a faint dizziness began to creep in. She pressed her palms against her lap, focusing on her breathing and trying to slow the rhythm of her heart. The guard, noting the subtle signals, made a quiet assessment. He understood that the moment required careful management, guiding Charlotte to a more private space if necessary, but without alarming the guests or disrupting the formal proceedings. Charlotte's mother whispered again, offering gentle guidance. "We'll take a moment soon, just a short break. You're doing so well." The words, soft and kind, provided comfort. Charlotte felt a small wave of gratitude for the care and attention surrounding her, and though the tremors had not completely disappeared, she now felt less alone in managing them. The guard's presence nearby, calm but vigilant, reinforced this sense of safety. At this point, it became clear to everyone observing, the royal family and staff alike, that Charlotte would need a quiet retreat from the dinner table. The guard signaled once more to the aide, and together they prepared a discreet exit plan. The key was subtlety. Charlotte needed to leave her seat without drawing attention, maintaining her dignity while receiving the care she required. The choreography of such an intervention was precise, a careful balance between urgency and discretion. When the right moment arrived, Charlotte's mother gently guided her forward, placing a hand on her daughter's back to steady her. The aide moved in close, providing a subtle supporting presence, while the guard flanked them slightly behind, his eyes scanning the room to ensure nothing disrupted the flow of the dinner. The guests continued their conversations, unaware of the careful operation unfolding just steps away. Charlotte felt a small surge of relief, grateful for the quiet professionalism of those around her. She realized that the support and vigilance surrounding her were not just protective. They were also empowering, allowing her to navigate the situation without panic or embarrassment. As they walked toward a private side room, Charlotte's hands slowly stopped trembling entirely, replaced by a calm steadiness she had not felt for hours. The soft lighting of the hallway, the muted hum of conversation from the main hall, and the gentle presence of her mother and the guard created a sense of serenity. The palace, with all its grandeur, had proven itself not just a place of ceremony, but also a space where care, vigilance, and empathy existed quietly behind the scenes. Charlotte realized in that moment the importance of the unseen network that supported her. Every gesture, every watchful eye, and every quiet word of reassurance contributed to a sense of safety that allowed her to regain control. The royal guard's intervention had been seamless, professional, and discreet, demonstrating the balance between duty and human empathy that defined the palace staff. Charlotte followed her mother through the quiet corridors of the palace, flanked by the attentive royal guard and the aide who had been discreetly assisting them. The soft carpets muffled their footsteps, and the warm golden lighting along the walls created a calm, serene atmosphere, far removed from the formal grandeur of the main dining hall. Every step she took was accompanied by a quiet reassurance from her mother, who gently guided her toward a private sitting room prepared for moments like this. Charlotte's hands, which had trembled so visibly at the table, now rested lightly on her lap as she tried to absorb the calmness of her surroundings. The room they entered was simple yet elegant, with plush armchairs, soft rugs, and a small table holding a carafe of water and glasses. The atmosphere was intentionally soothing, designed to allow anyone needing a quiet moment to regain composure. Charlotte sank into one of the armchairs, feeling the plush fabric support her as she took several deep, steadying breaths. The guard stood a respectful distance away, his posture formal but relaxed, his eyes still watchful. Even here, away from the dining hall, he remained alert, ready to assist if Charlotte's condition required immediate attention. Charlotte's mother sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You're safe now, love," she whispered. "Just take your time." The simple words were filled with warmth and reassurance, helping Charlotte focus on the moment rather than the pressures she had been feeling. She nodded slowly, allowing herself to relax for the first time since the dinner began. The tremor in her hands had almost completely subsided, replaced by a steadying calm that came from being in a safe space with people she trusted. The aide quietly poured a small glass of water and handed it to Charlotte, who sipped it gratefully. The cool liquid was soothing, a small but tangible comfort after the tense moments at the table. The guard observed, noting her calm, ensuring she was stable and had everything she needed. While the room was quiet, it was not silent. Soft, reassuring gestures from her mother and the gentle, professional presence of the palace staff provided a comforting rhythm that helped Charlotte regain her balance, both physically and emotionally. As the minutes passed, Charlotte's initial anxiety began to ebb further. She leaned back in the armchair, letting herself sink into the support it offered. Her mother remained close, offering soft words of encouragement and quiet reminders to breathe slowly. The guard, attentive but unobtrusive, continued to scan the room and corridors, ensuring no unexpected interruptions occurred. Even in this private setting, his awareness remained sharp. He had learned that calm and vigilance could coexist, and that true care often meant blending professionalism with empathy. Charlotte took a few more slow breaths, focusing on the rhythm of the air entering and leaving her lungs. The room, with its warm lighting and quiet atmosphere, felt safe in a way the bustling dining hall could not. She reflected on the events of the evening, the grand hall, the dignitaries, the conversations, and the tremor in her hands that had made her feel vulnerable. For a moment, she allowed herself to acknowledge the anxiety without judgment. It was natural to feel overwhelmed in such circumstances, and the support she was receiving now reminded her that vulnerability did not diminish her strength or poise. Her mother encouraged her to share her feelings quietly. "It's okay to tell me how you feel," she said gently. Charlotte hesitated at first, unsure how to put the sensations she had experienced into words, but eventually spoke in a soft voice. I felt my hands shaking and my chest felt tight. I tried to stay calm, but it was hard." Her mother nodded understandingly, her expression calm and supportive. "That's perfectly normal," she reassured her. Even in moments like these, it's okay to feel nervous. What matters is that you know how to find your calm again, and you're doing that now. The aide, still present but unobtrusive, refilled Charlotte's glass of water and offered a small handkerchief for comfort. The guard, meanwhile, subtly adjusted his position in the room to remain alert without being imposing. Every detail was considered: the lighting, the seating arrangement, the proximity of trusted family members, and the attentive yet discreet presence of trained staff. The goal was to create a sanctuary within the palace, a place where Charlotte could regain her composure without fear of scrutiny or interruption. Charlotte began to feel a small measure of relief as she focused on the quietness around her. The distant sounds of the main hall, the soft clinking of cutlery and faint conversations, reminded her that the world outside was still moving, yet she was temporarily removed from its demands. She felt gratitude for the presence of her mother and the professional support of the palace staff. Their care was not only practical but also deeply human, providing emotional reassurance that allowed her to reconnect with her sense of calm. The guard, noticing the improvement in Charlotte's demeanor, continued to monitor subtle cues: the relaxation of her shoulders, the steadiness of her hands, and the occasional quiet smile she gave as she adjusted in the armchair. He understood that recovery from a moment of stress was often gradual, requiring patience and attentiveness. Even though the immediate crisis had passed, his vigilance remained essential. Every small detail mattered, from the angle of her posture to the rhythm of her breathing. Charlotte's mother suggested a few gentle grounding exercises to help her fully regain composure. "Focus on your senses for a moment," she whispered. "Notice what you can see, hear, and feel. Let yourself come back to this room." Charlotte followed the guidance, observing the soft fabrics of the armchair, the gentle flicker of the light, and the faint aroma of the flowers placed on the table. She listened to the subtle sound of her own breathing and the quiet movements of the palace staff nearby. Slowly, she felt a sense of stability returning, as if the room itself was providing a steady anchor amidst the earlier anxiety. As the minutes passed, Charlotte's confidence began to rebuild. She lifted her head slightly, looking around the room with a sense of curiosity rather than tension. The palace, which had earlier felt overwhelming in its grandeur and ceremony, now appeared as a safe, managed space where support and care coexisted seamlessly with elegance. The juxtaposition of her earlier vulnerability with the calm present moment allowed her to recognize that even in high-pressure situations, there were always ways to find composure and reassurance. The guard, satisfied with Charlotte's steadying progress, remained nearby, but allowed the focus of attention to shift to her mother and Charlotte. The balance between family support and professional care had proven effective, and the room now radiated calm, dignity, and safety. Charlotte felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the people surrounding her. Their vigilance, empathy, and quiet professionalism had transformed a moment of anxiety into an experience of care and reassurance. As Charlotte continued to relax, she began to reflect on the events of the evening with greater clarity. She understood that her nervousness had not been a weakness, but a natural human response to a high-pressure situation. She recognized the importance of the invisible support network around her, which allowed her to maintain dignity and poise even in vulnerable moments. This understanding provided her with both comfort and perspective, reinforcing the lesson that vulnerability could coexist with strength, and that seeking help was not a sign of failure but a demonstration of wisdom and self-awareness. Charlotte's mother suggested that she remain seated for a few more moments, allowing the body and mind to fully recover. The aide offered additional comfort items quietly, and the guard maintained a vigilant yet respectful distance. The combined presence of family and staff created a layered sense of security, where every subtle need could be addressed immediately without disruption or embarrassment. Charlotte felt the tension leave her body gradually, replaced by a calm, reflective serenity that she had not experienced since the start of the dinner. In this private space, away from the eyes of the world, Charlotte experienced a sense of relief and appreciation. The careful attention of the palace staff, the silent vigilance of the guard, and the gentle reassurance of her mother had created a safe environment where she could navigate her feelings openly. She realized that these moments of quiet support were as essential as the formalities of the palace itself, providing a human connection that allowed her to continue her duties with renewed confidence. As the evening began to draw closer to its formal conclusion in the main hall, Charlotte felt ready to rejoin the event if necessary, or at least to resume her evening with dignity. Her hands were steady, her breathing even, and her mind focused. The guard and aide remained nearby, prepared to support her if needed, but their presence had become less intrusive, a testament to the effectiveness of their careful intervention. Charlotte felt a renewed sense of strength, a quiet understanding that even in moments of vulnerability, there were always people ready to offer help and care. After spending several quiet, restorative moments in the private sitting room, Charlotte slowly began to feel a sense of normalcy returning. The tremors in her hands had fully subsided, replaced by a calm steadiness she had not felt since the evening began. Her breathing was slow and measured, and the tightness in her chest had eased. Sitting in the plush armchair, she took stock of the events that had unfolded. Though the experience had been challenging, it had also revealed something profoundly important: the depth of care, vigilance, and empathy present in the people around her. The royal guard, the aide, and her mother had worked seamlessly to ensure that she was safe, supported, and reassured without ever drawing attention or creating alarm. Charlotte's mother leaned closer, her hand still gently resting on her daughter's arm. "You handled that beautifully," she said softly. "It's not easy to stay composed when you feel overwhelmed, but you did it." Charlotte smiled faintly, her relief showing in her expression. "I know it sounds small, but it felt like a lot," she admitted quietly. Her mother nodded, understanding exactly what her daughter meant. It had been a moment that tested both patience and composure, and yet it had also highlighted the strength of Charlotte's resilience. The royal guard remained attentive, though his posture was slightly more relaxed now that Charlotte's condition had stabilized. His eyes scanned the room, ready to act if needed, but he also allowed himself the reassurance that the immediate concern had passed. Years of training had taught him that protecting someone went beyond physical safety. It was also about emotional support, anticipation, and calm professionalism. His careful observation and timely intervention had ensured that Charlotte's dignity and comfort were preserved throughout the situation. Charlotte reflected on the subtle yet vital ways in which she had been supported. Every gesture, no matter how small, had made a difference. The whispered words of her mother, the gentle guidance of the aide, the quiet vigilance of the guard. Even in a palace filled with grandeur and formalities, these moments of empathy had provided a safe space where she could acknowledge her vulnerability without fear of judgment. She realized that such support was not a weakness. It was a necessary part of navigating the pressures of royal life. It allowed her to maintain composure, confidence, and dignity while also honoring her human needs. As Charlotte continued to regain her equilibrium, her mind began to consider the broader lessons of the evening. She understood that moments of nervousness or anxiety were natural, even for someone accustomed to public appearances. What mattered most was the ability to recognize these feelings, to accept them without self-criticism, and to rely on trusted support when needed. The evening had shown her that vulnerability and strength were not mutually exclusive. Rather, they could coexist, each enhancing the other. The aide quietly offered Charlotte another sip of water, which she accepted gratefully. The cool liquid was refreshing, and it gave her a moment to pause and reflect. Meanwhile, the guard subtly positioned himself near the doorway, maintaining a discreet watch over the hallway leading to the main hall. His presence, though quiet, was a constant reassurance, a reminder that safety and vigilance were always nearby. Charlotte noted the professionalism in his movements, the calm confidence that allowed her to feel protected without feeling constrained or observed too closely. Her mother spoke again, offering guidance on the final steps of the evening. "We will return to the dinner shortly," she said gently, "but only when you feel ready. There's no rush." Charlotte nodded, appreciating the patience and understanding in her mother's words. She took a few more deep breaths, centering herself, and gradually felt the tension and worry of earlier moments dissolve. The calmness in the room, combined with the careful attention of those around her, allowed her to reconnect with her confidence and sense of composure. Charlotte also reflected on the role of the palace staff in ensuring that such moments could be managed discreetly and effectively. From the attentive aides to the vigilant guards, every person had played a role in creating a safe, controlled environment. She realized that the outward elegance of the palace, with its sparkling chandeliers, polished tables, and formal rituals, was supported by a quiet but powerful network of care and preparedness. Without this network, moments of human vulnerability could quickly become crises. With it, even the most overwhelming situations could be navigated gracefully. After a few more minutes, Charlotte felt ready to move. Her mother offered her hand, which Charlotte took with gratitude. The aide stepped forward to provide subtle support, while the guard maintained his discreet position nearby. Together, they guided her back toward the main hall, their movements fluid and practiced, ensuring that her return would be seamless and unobtrusive. Charlotte felt a renewed sense of calm as she re-entered the dining space, the familiar sounds and sights of the evening now accompanied by a deeper understanding of her own resilience and the quiet strength of those around her. As she returned to her seat, Charlotte noticed the subtle warmth in the expressions of the staff and the soft acknowledgement from her parents. The guests around the table, unaware of the earlier struggle, continued their conversations with the same polite attentiveness. Charlotte allowed herself a small, private smile. She had managed the situation, relied on support when necessary, and maintained her composure in public, all while honoring her own human needs. The experience, though challenging, had strengthened her confidence and self-awareness. Throughout the remainder of the dinner, Charlotte engaged in conversation with a newfound sense of assurance. The tremors were gone, replaced by a steady confidence that radiated from her posture and gentle smiles. She found herself noticing the elegance and care in the surroundings with a renewed appreciation. The intricate floral arrangements, the soft gleam of the crystal, the subtle melodies of the string quartet. Every detail, once potentially overwhelming, now felt manageable, part of the broader beauty and grace of the palace experience. The royal guard, ever vigilant, continued to observe from a respectful distance, his presence a quiet reassurance that any unexpected situation could be handled with discretion and professionalism. Charlotte, now calm and centered, felt a profound sense of gratitude for the care she had received. She recognized the delicate balance between public duty and personal well-being, and how the support of family and staff could transform moments of anxiety into experiences of growth and reflection. By the conclusion of the evening, Charlotte had fully regained her composure. She reflected quietly on the lessons of the night, the importance of acknowledging one's feelings, the value of seeking support, and the power of quiet, empathetic intervention. She understood that being part of the royal family required not just public elegance, but also the ability to navigate private challenges with grace, resilience, and self-awareness. These insights, though learned in a single evening, would remain with her, providing guidance for future events and moments of pressure. As the guests began to depart, Charlotte's parents offered her soft words of praise and encouragement. "You did wonderfully tonight," her mother said. "I'm proud of how you handled yourself." Her father added a quiet nod of approval, reinforcing her sense of accomplishment. Charlotte felt a warm sense of pride, not for the perfection of her performance, but for the strength, self-awareness, and courage she had demonstrated in facing a difficult moment with dignity. The royal guard, finally able to relax fully, exchanged a subtle glance with his colleague, a silent acknowledgement that the evening had been managed successfully. His vigilance and timely intervention had ensured that Charlotte's well-being was preserved, and that the event continued smoothly without incident. He understood that moments like these, though quiet and unassuming, were essential in supporting both the royal family and the integrity of the palace's formal proceedings. Charlotte sat for a few more minutes after the guests left, reflecting on the events of the evening. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people around her, the family members who offered quiet reassurance, the aides who anticipated every need, and the guards who maintained vigilance without intrusion. She recognized that elegance, composure, and grace were not just matters of appearance, but also the product of careful care, empathy, and attentive support behind the scenes. As she prepared to leave the private sitting room, Charlotte felt a renewed sense of confidence and understanding. She realized that vulnerability was not something to fear or hide, but a natural part of being human. She had experienced it openly, been supported through it, and emerged with a deeper awareness of her own strength and resilience. The evening, with all its grandeur, had become a profound lesson in empathy, professionalism, and the quiet power of human connection. By the time Charlotte returned to her private quarters, the palace was calm and serene. The events of the evening were over, yet the lessons remained vivid in her mind. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had navigated a challenging moment with dignity and support, and that the people around her had acted with care, patience, and empathy. The experience had strengthened her not just as a member of the royal family, but as a young individual capable of understanding her own feelings, seeking support when needed, and maintaining composure in even the most formal and high-pressure situations. In those quiet moments, Charlotte reflected on the invisible network of care that surrounded her every day. The family, staff, and guards whose professionalism and empathy allowed her to fulfill her duties while remaining supported as a human being. She understood that this network was what truly upheld the dignity of the palace and the well-being of its inhabitants, making the grandeur and elegance of royal life possible without sacrificing human care.